Namaskar viewers. Today we will be discussing on a particular topic, that is recent changes in GST, its implications and impact. I am Kaustuva Barik. I am from School of Social Sciences in IGNOU, and with me is my colleague Saugato Sen. We both are from IGNOU itself. This program is visible in Gyan Darshan, and this is available on Gyanvani also, Facebook Live, EMPC-IGNOU YouTube Live channel, and Swayam Prabha channel. So you can log on to or switch on any of these channels and you can watch this program. This topic, that recent changes in GST, this is a very important in the sense that just recently there are quite a few changes, some radical changes in the goods and services tax in fact. So we will be discussing about what these changes have been, how these changes impact us, and what are the implications. These issues we'll be taking up one by one. First, we'll see that these recent changes have been reduction in tax rates. Like earlier, whatever the tax rate was there on GST, these rates have been reduced. The number of slabs, tax slabs have been reduced. Some of the anomalies, particularly some of the structure, that GST structure was a little bit retrograde, that have been removed. And some in any case, this will lower the tax burden on people and give a boost to economic growth. So we will discuss all these topics one by one. Now let's begin with GST. What is GST? GST is one indirect tax. Okay, in the sense that this tax is not imposed directly on individuals or on corporate firms. This is imposed on commodities, goods and services. So that way it is one of the indirect taxes. You might be knowing that taxes could be direct and indirect. Direct taxes like income tax, corporate tax. Similarly, this indirect tax, there are several indirect taxes earlier, and with the introduction of GST, all these taxes have been unified. I'll ask Saugato to throw some light on GST, how it evolved, what is the basic rationale behind this, and related issues.
Thank you, Professor Kaustuva. Actually, GST, as Professor Kaustuva was just saying, is an indirect tax. The indirect tax basic feature is that the unit on which the tax is imposed does not get to pay it, unlike, say, income tax. If income tax is imposed on you, you have to pay the income tax. But in indirect tax, what happens was, when a tax is imposed, say on manufacturer, let us say sales tax was an earlier example, they can shift it to the consumer through price increases. Now, when that happens, the incidence, what is called the incidence and the impact, they are two different things, and therefore they are, going to different people. Earlier in India, there was many indirect taxes, and in those indirect taxes, like octroi, you have heard, excise duties, and so on and so forth, there were a lot of confusion, lot of anomalies, and between different states, different rates prevailed. So in 1986, there was some experimentation with what is called modified value-added tax, and later in the 90s, for some time, a value-added tax was adopted. But the real thrust came in the 21st century, in around 2000, during the time of the then Prime Minister, Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee. There was a committee called Kelkar Committee on Taxes that first mooted the idea. Earlier, there were some economic advisors to the Prime Minister who had suggested a tax on GST, tax like GST. The basic thing about the GST was that it is a single tax. The principle is one nation, one tax, as far as possible, to simplify the complex thing. Anyway, discussions took place, committees were imposed, and in 2006, the then government thought that the GST would be rolled out by 2010. But again, there were some discussions, and due to some reasons, the GST could finally be adopted on the 1st of July 2017, and that's since when the GST is there. It's a forward-looking tax. It's simplified. It did away with earlier about 17 indirect taxes and about several cesses that were imposed and modified into a single GST tax, goods and services tax. The Prime Minister, when it was launched, said that it is actually a good and simple tax. The idea was to make it a very good and very simple. Simplicity is of the essence. So that is the story, and it has been from 2017. There have been some tweakings here and there about the rates, but this time the changes suggested on the 3rd of September, and then which came into effect from the 22nd of September, is the really big changes, and Professor Barik will explain further as to what the changes, and we'll take up the discussion further from there.
Yes, Saugato, as you mentioned, there is a multitude of indirect taxes actually. We had central excise duties, service tax, then value-added tax, sales tax, entertainment tax, and so on.
Right.
So, like a typical feature of this was that they varied from state to state. There are not only the multitude of taxes, but the states were different for different states actually. And this led to a lot of confusion. There was a double taxation in the sense that the same commodity is being taxed again and again. So, in order to streamline all these things, the GST has been quite helpful. Now we have a unified tax system where there is a single rate of tax which is available or which is implemented on all commodities throughout the country. Another important feature of this GST is that it is a dual structure. Dual in the sense that the state and center, they don't impose the tax separately. The commodity is taxed one time only, and there is a sharing of the tax or the revenue by the center and states. Secondly, this is a destination based. The collection point of the tax is the destination. A third feature is that this one is paid by the consumers.
That's right.
This tax is not paid by the manufacturers or the sellers actually. The sellers and the manufacturers, they are the collection point. So whenever we as consumers pay some tax, we bear the burden. It is not the producer or the seller of the commodity. Right. So what happens that this introduction of GST brought in quite a few issues actually. A lot of that it couldn't be, although the process started in the year 2000, it took long 17 years to come into light, because many issues, many of these debatable issues, many of these challenges, those have to be sorted out. For example, when a state is imposing some taxes on some goods or services, the revenue is going to the state kitty itself. But when the center is imposing the tax, what will the states share? Will there be a revenue loss on the part of the state? How to share the revenue between the center and the state? One. Then secondly, how that suppose there is a small shopkeeper from whom we buy our daily bread and all the regular goods. So how the tax will be collected from there? So these are some of the challenging issues which needed to be sorted out, and because of all these things, it came to light in 2017. Right. So that in 2017, when this GST was introduced, there were 5 tax rates. Okay, this was 0%, 5%, 12%, 18%, and 28%. 0% means there is no tax on those commodities. These are the basic essential commodities like milk, rice, and so many things. Okay, so that keeping on the nature of the commodity, starting with the essential commodities to say luxury goods, the tax rates went on increasing. That way, the progression in tax that luxury commodities should be taxed at a higher rate. That progression was maintained. But still, some of the anomalies were noticed. Even some of the researchers, they mentioned that this tax rate is retrograde, in the sense that a poor household spends most of its income on consumption of goods and services. And these goods and services, whatever that person is consuming, that is being taxed. Some of the commodities, for example, say textile products, those were taxed at the rate of 18% earlier. So, which is very essential and very, very necessary commodity for everyone. So, these sort of anomalies had to be simplified. Secondly, that 28% was a higher tax rate, but when there was a revenue loss on the part of some of the states, when they couldn't make up or couldn't recover the taxes which states were doing earlier when they had it in their own control, then in that case there was a compensatory tax or compensatory cess on all the on certain commodities. So this compensation cess was imposed on certain commodities like luxuries or some of the sin goods or the demerit goods or the negative goods such as tobacco, cigarettes, pan masala, many of these commodities actually, which there is a need to discourage consumption of those commodities. So in those sort of commodities, there was a compensation that cess that was imposed. So the revenue generated out of this compensation cess, that was allocated to states to make up for the revenue loss which they had because of introduction of GST. So now let's come to the reforms or the changes that has come place just recently from 22nd September 2025. Okay, so here what has happened that from that 5 tax structures, now we have 4 rates. We have 0%, that is nil tax on certain commodities. We have 5%, 18%, and 40% on some luxury and demerit goods. Okay, so what has overall happened that about 99% of goods under this 12% slab that has moved to 5%, and about 90% goods that has moved from 28% slab to 18% slab. Okay, so there is a substantial reduction in the tax rates, right? So how Dr. Saugato can tell what are the implications of this reduction?
Yeah, before we deal with the implications, what is to be more accurate, there are still slightly different rates. For instance, there is only a 0.25% rate of tax on things like unpolished diamonds and 1.5% rate of tax GST on polished diamonds, and very little on pearls and gold and silver, also precious metals. But the significant thing that has happened is there was a clamor earlier for simplifying things. For instance, earlier taken commodity like popcorn, caramelized popcorn and salted popcorn used to be taxed at different rates. These have been simplified. About 516 goods are now essentially food items, essentially items of daily consumption for common people. That has been taxed now, will be taxed now only at 5%. So this is aimed to bring down the prices, and this is also aimed for simplification. Professor Barik was talking about the implications. Now, implications we will discuss in detail. Let us first discuss the objectives, why the government thought of this. The government thought of this main reason for reducing taxes was, of course, to give a boost both to consumption, and the hope was also that investment will be encouraged and therefore growth will be fostered in the economy. And to that end, many simplifications, apart from reducing the rates, earlier there was For instance, health and insurance used to be taxed. Health and life insurance. Now they have been entirely removed from GST. There will be no GST on such items. And to be very accurate, actually, GST is governed by a GST council, which has some representation from central ministers, the union finance minister, and some minister from the central government, but also most state chief ministers and lieutenant governors, or sometimes other officials from union territories, are also members of the council. So it is the GST council that actually suggests changes and brings changes. But it is true that on 15th August, the Prime Minister in his speech on Independence Day did indicate about his desire to revise the GST structure. Anyway, the effect is, now we'll get into detail, the objective of the government is to reduce the disparity and also to foster consumption, because year-on-year economic growth in India after the COVID, which was growing at about 8 to 9% every year since 21-22, last year certainly dropped a bit to 6.5% year-on-year growth between 23-24 and 24-25. So there is a need to let the growth pick up. And we'll get into the details of the implications. I'll ask Professor Barik to continue this discussion, and then we can add a few points.
In fact, I would like to point out one instance, that is of the textile sector. Okay, textile sector, earlier the tax rate was 18%. Now that has come down to 5%. Similarly, paper packaging, that was taxed at 12%, and now that has come again to 5%. So, on the whole, about 10% decline is there on these garments and textiles, in fact, except for some textiles which are of the high end value. Okay, in those cases, like you have a higher tax rate, but generally this is coming down to 5%. So because of that, we expect that the demand for goods and services, goods particularly this textile, if we take this example, packaging and textiles, this will increase the demand for goods and goods. Okay, so this domestic demand will get a boost because of this decline in prices of these textile products. Another aspect is that this will give some competitiveness in the world market also, because Indian goods will become cheaper. So not only there will be a boost in domestic demand for this textile, there will be some export promotion also because of this reduction in GST. So because of these issues particularly, this will, what will happen that because of this decrease in GST particularly, the overall that demand, the consumption will go up. This will promote the aggregate demand or increase aggregate demand in the country. And if the demand increases, this will increase investment in the country. And because of increase in investment, there will be economic growth. So the whole cycle of demand, investment, and again that output, that will be complete, and that process will continue.
Yes. And if I may add here, Professor Barik rightly said that the aim is to encourage further demand in consumption, and also when manufacturers see that there's an increased demand for their goods, there will be always an incentive to invest more, and through a multiplier effect, when investment goes up, the growth will go up. But there's another objective which is implicit but which is clear from the statements by the government, and that is that we are in a very difficult position facing high tariffs by the US. And so one of the objectives is to encourage domestic production. Apart from trying to boost exports to other destinations rather than USA, the idea is that we anticipate that there will be many goods which will not be able to sold to America because the prices for the consumers there has gone up. So there will be fall in Indian demand. So the government wishes that those demand is fulfilled by the domestic demand. what cannot be exported to US and all. So the government is also trying to encourage consumption of those goods which are produced in India, and therefore also the government is stressing a lot on Swadeshi and Atmanirbharta, and it is said that the road to the Viksit Bharat, which the government hopes to bring in by 2047, is, as the government rightly says, is through the path of Atmanirbharta and Swadeshi. So Swadeshi is a long-term plan, and to aid that, the GST simplification is aimed to increase consumption so that there is an increase of consumption of domestic good. That is one of the larger objectives behind the GST simplification, that there should be growth in growth in demand for Indian goods. That is the expectation. And so there can be other effects that
in
Professor
fact,
Barik
see, there are three stakeholders here. The impact of this reduction in GST will be on three segments or three stakeholders, three agents actually. One is your government, how it gains or loses.
That's right.
The second one is your consumers. What is the impact on them? And the third one is the manufacturers and sellers. So let's analyze one by one actually. The government, because of the reduction in these rates, definitely there will be a revenue loss. So that revenue loss will be for the central government and for the state government, both of them. Right. So what we expect that if there is a demand growth, if the demand increases, and if there is a production boost because of the growth, because of the demand, the taxes will be compensated. The revenue generated will be compensated. There will be increase in revenue because of higher sales. Okay, so that is one. So in the long run, there may not be any revenue loss on the part of the government, and that will be taken care of. The second is the consumers, definitely because of the lower tax rates, they will benefit. There will be, the prices will come down, and this will have some side effect of controlling the inflation rate or the prices also. The third point is about the manufacturers and the sellers. How will they benefit or lose out of that? As I mentioned in the beginning, that this is an indirect tax. So the producers or the sellers or the manufacturers, they don't have anything to do here. They are the collection points only. They don't bear the tax. They pass on the tax to the consumers. This is ultimately paid by the buyer, the consumers only. So since they are the collection points, they have to file the returns. They have to, do the processing, the paperwork. The paperwork should be simple. That should be simplified. So in this, to have a proper guidelines or to have the proper the connectivity and the proper that mechanism to file the returns, that is more important, and that is being taken care of. Right? So these are see what will happen, that this will be a win-win situation for both the government, the consumers, and the producers also.
And we may add here that one of the things that the government has encouraged ever since the GST regime came into operation in 2017 was that government has been encouraging consumers to always insist on receipts and the invoices, because that will actually make things easier for the government to keep track of the changes. As you rightly said, Professor Barik, that it is passed on to the consumers, and through the prices of the consumers, the tax is tracked. The collection agencies are actually, in a way, the manufacturers. That is an effect. I mean, that is there. Definitely, the simplification will benefit the consumers and will benefit the manufacturers also. But it is to be the revenue loss that is being talked of is likely to be quite colossal, because what will happen is that there are certain states which are grumbling, although they have welcomed that there will be loss, consumers will gain, But they feel that if there is a revenue loss, unless that is compensated, their welfare schemes which are run by the state governments might take a hit, at least in the short run. In fact, the government itself has estimated that there will be a revenue loss in the short run. So that is one point that has to be observed and played out. And so maybe we can...
In fact, there is another is this compensation cess. That compensation cess also will be discontinued from 22nd September. So those people who are, some of the commodities where this compensation cess is there, except for tobacco and related products, it is all discontinued from September 22nd. Sure. So those products, the luxury commodities like cars or AC or fridge or washing machines, all these also will be cheaper. Well, thank you, Beer. We end the session